Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer. I'm so happy to welcome you to today's CUGC Connect webinar with ControlUp. We are going to talk about automatically solving your Citrix problems. I think we're going to get a look at their new automation engine today during the presentation. But before we get into that, I just want to remind you all that if you have questions, please type those into the question box that you have in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll keep an eye on those and we'll ask those as appropriate during the presentation. We may get to some during and we may say some for the end. So just type those in as you have them and we'll be sure to get as many of those answered as possible. All right, with us today on our call, we have Trentent. Trentent is a CTP and a technical specialist at ControlUp. He's going to be handling the main presentation. And we also have Lisa Malachevsky. She is the Global Event Marketing Manager. I think you've probably seen her on Twitter. She's done some, I know she's done some really great little videos from some of our CUGC events. So I'm happy to have her on with us today. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to the two of you to get us started. I think, Lisa, you wanted to say a little something at the beginning.
Yeah, hi guys, happy hump day. My name is Lisa, I run event marketing for ControlUp, as Stephanie said. Just wanted to say welcome to today's webinar. We've got CTP Trent Ty here, and just also wanted to thank CUGC for hosting this event. So during this webinar, Trent's gonna talk about our new automation solution and how it can solve your issues before they happen. And he's gonna focus a little bit on enabling your local host cache to reduce downtime and optimizing resources used for idle or disconnected sessions to improve your end user experience and much more. So with that, we'll turn it over to Trent and let's do this.
All right, Trent, I'm gonna send you the screen if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, here it comes.
All right, let me know if you can see the screen.
I see it.
Okay, great. So this is our webinar. We're automatically solving Citrix problems with ControlUp. And so let's begin. So to start, let's just go over a quick agenda that we will be having. So we'll go over a quick company overview and then we'll get straight into the live demos. And this will be our ControlUp real-time and our real-time performance troubleshooting, monitoring and optimizing the user experience, and then our automation engine, and then we'll dive into ControlUp Insights. Excuse me. All right, so ControlUp, we're a company that's based out of San Jose and Israel. So we're headquartered in San Jose with about 120 employees with R&D in Israel. We've got strong financial backing, and we've got a good number of customers and partnerships today. And just a quick look at our architecture overview. We support on-premise and in the cloud. We support all the major vendors, so VMware, Citrix, Microsoft, and Nutanix for on-premise, and then the various cloud platforms, Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, and the Google Cloud Platform. So ControlUp can connect to resources on all of them and monitor their performance. We do monitoring with collective thresholds. We do analytics, which allows us to do community level benchmarking, and then we do remediation with some crowdsourced scripting. So what that is we've got different objects you can click on and actually run an action. And now new this year, as of Synergy, we've got automatic remediation with our automated engine. So this is just a look at some of the customers that we've had in 2018. So we've been growing pretty quickly, and so we're in a pretty good position in the market, I think. Okay, so let's hop into the live demos. We'll start with some real-time performance troubleshooting, just giving you the idea for what ControlUp is capable of and what it can do. And then we'll look at the monitoring and optimizing the user experience, and we'll look at the automation engine and all the automation scenarios we can come up with. So to start, all right, so here's our lab environment, and when you're troubleshooting with ControlUp, one of the first things you see is that we've got color-coded columns. So green is good, yellow is maybe some attention needs to be had, and then red is bad. And so immediately we can see in this one particular host that we have red being flagged for our data store read-write IOPS. So with ControlUp, we can actually very quickly troubleshoot this particular issue. So by clicking on this hamburger icon, we actually get into what's called the virtual expert. And what the virtual expert does is it suggests to us 3 different places we can navigate to troubleshoot this issue. So I'm going to drill down each one in succession so we can examine the issue in kind. So let's start with the computers view. And what the virtual expert does is it takes our view and then it sorts it. So it drills down into the computer's view and then sorts it according to the column that it suspects is driving our issue. So in this particular one, it's taken our data store read-write IOPS and it's telling us that it suspects that it's the virtual disk read-write IOPS column here, and it's sorted it accordingly so we can continue troubleshooting. So we can see that it's this particular virtual machine, tools 2012 VM, that's the cause of the IOPS. But this is really still a high-level type scenario here. So if we want to find out further what's causing the issue, we can continue to click, and this will give us the option to drill down into the sessions view or the processes view. So if we click on the sessions view, this will drive us down into the sessions that are on that server. So this ends up being a remote desktop services machine, and we've got a user here, Steve DeVincent, and it looks like he's the one driving these IOPS issues. So again, this is still a high level. We're still not quite down at that level where we can determine exactly what's causing the issue. We've got the name of the user and his account and what virtual machine it's causing it, but we can go further and actually find even more what's causing it. So if we drive down into the processes view, we can actually see that there's a process dynamo.exe. This is the exact process that's causing our issue that goes all the way from the host level all the way down to this level. So if we wanted to find out what is dynamo.exe, because as an IT tech, I may not be familiar with healthcare applications or other applications that might be in your environment, we actually provide you the tools to actually troubleshoot this further. So we can actually right click on this guy and we can actually get a list of options that we can do against the session. So we can get a session screenshot, we can kill his group policy, reapply it or refresh it, we can start a process in a session, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to get a session screenshot so that way we can see what this user is doing. And immediately I could see he's running an application. So this application is consuming a lot of CPU, a lot of IOPS. I can see he's got something on his screen here. This could be frozen, or maybe the process has kind of run away. We can actually enable auto refresh here to actually see that the process is actually doing some level of work. And what we can see is that the screen is changing. So I think that we can probably conclude that this application is working as expected. So the question then becomes, how do we manage with this? Potentially we need to reach out to the user and call them and tell them, hey, you shouldn't be running this during business hours if this is some kind of performance tool. Or we can actually take an action against this process. We can actually set the CPU affinity. We can set the process priority so that way we can reduce its CPU load, or we can even throttle the CPU so it only works on a fixed amount of CPU percentage. So this is pretty cool. So this allows us to actually troubleshoot very, very quickly almost anything within our environment. And ControlUp has the ability to actually run script actions against any object that you see. So if we right click on the processes, these are all script actions we can run against the processes, and against the session, these are all the script actions we can run against the session. And then we've got more and more and more within the rest of the product. So now let's get into some of the new user experience metrics that we have. ControlUp actually has a new user experience metric called user input delay. So this is actually a new metric from Microsoft, and what it does is it allows us to measure from when you click on an object to when you get a UI response. So when you click on, well, even in this particular application, if I click on this file menu, how quickly the next portion of this file menu responds and it draws that screen, it'll actually measure from when you clicked to when it responded. So if you've got applications that have slowness within the UI, we can actually measure that now. And let me give you a demonstration of that. So I've got this application here, Adobe Acrobat, and I've actually got a 3D model open. And so we can see it's here, acroread32.exe. So this is my Acrobat in this. And as I start to manipulate this model, we can actually see the user input delay adjust itself based on how quickly it's responding to my mouse clicks. Right, so now we're about 250 milliseconds, 282 milliseconds, and so on and so forth. And one of the cool things we can do is within ControlUp, we can actually adjust the process priority of this through automation based on the user experience. So as I continue to manipulate this model, and as the user input delay exceeds a certain threshold, we'll actually see my process priority jump up to above normal. Okay, and so while that's going, and there it is. So ControlUp, what it does is as it's reading these values, it takes 3 seconds for it to go, so that way it's not a transient value, and then it'll run the script action. So it detected that our user input delay was high, and it subsequently increased our process priority. So what that actually looks like, if I go into my triggers, you set a trigger in order to enable the automation. So I've got this trigger right here, increase process priority for user input delay greater than a certain value. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the acroread32. The process priority is less than or equal to normal. And if the user input delay is greater than 600 milliseconds, then it'll actually run this action, increase process priority. So we can take a look at what this script is. So if I'm looking at the scripts, this is my script here. We can see it's extremely simple. So ControlUp with its trigger system and ControlUp itself with its script action, it allows us to set the filter at the trigger level, which removes all of the logic out of the script, allowing us to have some very simple scripts. And so what I've done here is I'm passing through one argument, and that's this %1, and this ends up being the process name. And then I'm executing this command, wmic process where name equals, and then this ends up being the acro read, call set priority above normal, and then that's how it gets kicked in and gets changed. So again, very simple, very powerful, and all of a sudden we have some complex behavior that's very specific and tuned to this particular environment. Okay, so now I'm going to look at another user experience automation, and that is something that we just came out with. We had a blog post out in August about reducing your idle and disconnect session load. So one of the challenges of a Citrix environment is optimizing your resources. You've got shared resources that you've got multiple users using a CPU, multiple users using memory, and so on and so forth. And the challenge is that users who are logged onto your system but are idle, or if they're in a disconnected state that's also idle, then they're consuming resources. And the challenge there is that they're consuming resources away from users who are trying to be productive. So if you are stressing your environment enough that your active and your active users are sharing these resources, they're actually performing worse than they would be if those users weren't there, or if we could reduce their impact somehow. So let's look at how we can reduce their impact. So I'm back in my environment here. I've got this particular user here. He's in an active state, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to change him so that way we can see more information. I'm going to actually change him to be in a disconnected state. And now watch his memory working set and all the memory working set of these processes and the process priority here. So as ControlUp picks up that he's gone into a disconnected state, it's going to adjust the process priority of all his session processes to be below normal, except for any excluded processes or system processes. And then it's going to take the memory working set and it's going to trim it down to 0. So immediately you can see we went from 255 megabytes or thereabouts down to 33. So we've saved 200 megabytes worth of memory. And we should see the process priority drop down. Sometimes it takes just a little bit. Okay, well, it didn't pick up this user for some reason, but let's try it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to disconnect this user or log off this session. And then I'm going to RDP to this machine. And we'll see the user show up here. Okay, we'll drill back into him. And we can see his memory working set again, 486 megabytes, and we'll disconnect him again. Okay, and then as the automation runs, again, it'll manipulate the resources, both of the memory working set and the process priority. So here we can see the process priority has now dropped, and then we'll see the memory working set itself trim. And there we go. So immediately we can envision what this could do for your environment. So if you've got disconnected users or idle users, then we'll be able to actually reduce their load on your environment and actually improve the performance of the users that are active. So how do you set this up? How does this look like? So we actually have provided community triggers to do all this for you. So if I look back in my trigger system here, we have these triggers, session state triggers, and you could tell that they're community triggers because they got the little ControlUp icon next to them. And so if we're looking at the session state active, active to idle, disconnected, and idle 15 minutes to active or idle to active, whichever one you want to choose. These are the 4 you need to enable this optimization. So one of the cool things about these optimizations, I'm just going to go back here, is that even though this is in a disconnected state, we don't leave these users like this. If they were to come back and if they were to reconnect to their session, ControlUp will pick up that the session state will have changed from disconnected, gone back to active, and it's going to change all of these values back to their original ones that they were before. So the memory working set we can see is already consuming more memory because as the session becomes active, these processes start waking up and then they start consuming memory that they had before. And then we can see the process priority got changed to what it was previously. So pretty cool. So users, even though they got shifted down, they're not permanently down. They get moved back up. So again, let's look at the triggers first. We'll look at the active trigger setting. So what this is if the session state goes from disconnected to active, and it's been in that state for 3 seconds, then we adjust the process priority based on session state. So this is a script-based action that I wrote that will actually determine the session state based on some parameters that we pass into it. We'll take a look at that in a second. And then if we go from active to idle, we're going from any state to the state is equal to active, which means the screen's being remoted, and the idle time in minutes is greater than 15, is equal to or greater than 15. So once that happens, we do 2 things. We trim the process memory working sets, and we adjust the process priority based on session state. And then if we look at disconnected, Same thing, we go from an active to a disconnected state. And then we adjust the process priority and we trim the process memory working sets again. And then last one, from idle to active. We go if the idle time in minutes is greater than or equal to 15 and the idle time in minutes is equal to 0 and the active state, or the state is equal to active. So this is going from to. Then we adjust the process priority, and I've got a new thing I'm working on with Citrix Session Recording where I record the session state. Okay, and so let's look at the script actions for those two particular actions. So for adjusting the process priority, we run it under the session context, under the target computer. So this means it runs under the local system of the machine that session is resting on. This is the script for it. So I added some complexity to it because I wanted it to be able to detect whether a session was idle or active, and actually being able to exclude certain processes from being manipulated. So that's all in the arguments here. We pass over from ControlUp, we pass over the ID, the user, the state, so whether it's active or disconnected, the idle time in minutes, and the process priority floor. So this is actually something you can adjust. So if below normal is too high for you, you can set it to idle, or so on and so forth. And then the excluded processes as well. We could specify additional processes in here that we want to exclude from being processed. Okay, and then the other one that we want to look at is the trim process memory working set. So this is actually a script written by the great Guy Leach, and he provided this to us. So again, session on the target computer. And so for this one, we've got different parameters as well. You've got the process or the session ID, and then how much memory to trim to. So if you don't want to trim all the memory, if you just want to trim some amount of memory, so that way there's still some memory in the working set of that process, so that way it doesn't have to go out to the page file and actually pull it back in, you can do that. And again, we can actually exclude processes from having their memory trimmed as well. Cool, so that's optimizing your session resources and your session load. Okay, so now I want to get into a couple other things that we've been working on. So I've been working on, this will be coming out in a new blog post. So this is for, actually I'm just going to pause for 1 second. So I got a question. The question is, the triggers for user state is in the next version of ControlUp. The triggers for the user state is actually, it's been in all versions of ControlUp. It's been there pretty much since the beginning. So you can actually start creating those triggers now. And the next question is, and when can we expect an approximate time frame for rollout, and when will the on-premises version be available at the same release as the cloud deployment? So the automation is available in the 7.4.1.6 release, which is available both on-premise and on the cloud release. So automation is available for everyone today. You're more than able to actually start downloading it now. Okay, so let's look at Citrix Session Recording and ServiceNow integration. So this is part of the augmented troubleshooting automation actions that we've been developing. So one of the things that I've been working on is, and this will be coming out in a blog post soon, is Citrix Session Recording. So Citrix Session Recording, it's a product from Citrix that actually records the entire screen of a session, and it allows you to review it for either auditing purposes or troubleshooting purposes. And so what we can do with it, if you're using it for troubleshooting purposes, we can actually use ControlUp to start annotating events within it when we hit certain thresholds. So for instance, if I'm looking at CPU load, if users complain that, hey, my CPU, my session has problems and I want to find out why, I can actually, within ControlUp, create a trigger that looks at something like CPU is greater than or equal to 25. So I've got 4 cores on my system. Single process would be 25%. I can actually run an action, Citrix Session Recording CPU. So this will actually annotate in the Citrix Session Recording that CPU had hit some level of above 25. And then I can do the same thing with network latency, You can see I'm targeting this particular user for my test user, so I'm looking at a latency above 60 milliseconds, and then I'll record the network latency through that script. And then user input delay, again, doing the same thing, targeting a specific user for my testing, and whether the user input delay is greater than or equal to 300 milliseconds. And then I can actually do the same thing with the session states. So I've actually got a Citrix session recording script to annotate when the session state changes. And so what does this look like? So if I look at, if I go back to my sessions, if I look at my sessions here, I can actually open through ControlUp the Citrix session recording web player, which is new in the 1909 release of the Citrix virtual apps and desktops. And immediately I can see that I've got two Citrix session recordings, one that has 5 events and one that has 0 events. So if you're within Citrix today and you're trying to record performance-based information, this is what you see is you get 0 events. So when you look at this video, you can see on the right here that there's actually nothing, it's blank. You get no events whatsoever. But if we go back and we look at this one, we can see we actually have different events that have been recorded. So the session state went to active at 42 seconds. I probably went idle and then back to active at 3 minutes and 42 seconds. I encountered 0 milliseconds of latency when I was doing some testing here, and 1 millisecond of network latency here, and my user input delay ended up being 0 milliseconds when I was manipulating it. So the cool thing with these events is that as they're being annotated, you can actually click on them, and the recording takes you to that particular view, so you can actually see what the user is doing. So I think for those of you with Citrix session recording, this could be a really powerful tool for your troubleshooting purposes. And for those of you on, I guess, Platinum or whatever Citrix calls it today, I think this is another tool that you can add to your toolbox to help you troubleshoot users that are having particular problems. And at least new with, excuse me, new with Citrix Zen App and Zen Desktop 7.18, ControlUp actually gives you the ability to enable Citrix session recording on the fly. So you can actually choose to start it and stop it. And so this is really cool for if you're working with, a user that you're aware of, we can actually set it so that way we can control Citrix session recording through these triggers. So we can actually go and create like a new trigger where this particular user is logged on, and say we want to have his user be like that. And so then all of a sudden we can just add a trigger to actually start Citrix session recording. And then just like that, we've been working with this user. He said he's totally fine with us recording a session for the purposes of troubleshooting. So we can now create a trigger that automatically starts each time he logs on or logs off, or each time he logs on, sorry. And then as well, you can also tie that in with other events too. So if a process were to start, you could start Citrix session recording and so on and so forth. So pretty cool flexibility, and you can just kind of start imagining the possibilities that you can do with this. So this is really, really fantastic stuff. So let's talk about ServiceNow. So a lot of people have ServiceNow, and we do integrate with ServiceNow. And what we do today with ServiceNow is that we've got some custom scripts that have been written. And if we're looking at our sessions, we actually look at things like logon duration or even user latency again, so network latency. And we actually can record everything that the analyze logon duration script provides. So if we're looking at, we'll just look at how this is set up, and then we'll look at what this looks like. So I'm going to go to this guy. So we've got this particular trigger set up. So logon duration is greater than or equal to 25 seconds. We're going to run this script. So ServiceNow logon duration incident. And what that does is that connects into ServiceNow and automatically creates a ticket. So this particular user, Tony, he looks like he had a 62 second. Actually, we can look at Barry. Barry has a 43-second logon time. So his incident ticket should have been created. So we can click on this and we can actually go open ServiceNow. And this will actually open ServiceNow and log me into it. And then if I click on incidents, we can actually see here's Barry, and here's his ticket. Logon duration exceeded 42.4 seconds. And if we click on it, we can actually see much, much more detailed information than you would get otherwise. Because, you know, if a user has a slow logon, they might just call and say, hey, you know, I had a slow logon earlier today. Well, to be able to go back and find out what was causing his slow logon would be really difficult. But now here we've got so much more contextual information that we can begin to troubleshoot immediately. And it looks like in Barry's particular case, there was something that was happening between group policy and the pre-shell user in it. So that's what this interim delay is that this process is finished at 4:34 and pre-shell didn't start till 05:03. So we should be able to take a look and see what's happening between these two stages, particularly for Barry, and actually start troubleshooting, as opposed to having to reach out to the customer, call them, maybe try to get them to replicate it, hope it replicates, and so on and so forth, and do that troubleshooting. So this gives us a lot more contextual information, so that way we have more information on what to do to troubleshoot further. Okay, so let's get to some of the automatic remediation. So this is kind of the cool stuff that, you know, is changing a lot. So automatic remediation, this is the ability to proactively fix issues before they become issues. So what I mean by that is we'll look at like low disk space. When your disk space becomes low, we can actually run, you know, the disk cleanup manager and actually clean up the disk of your VDI or your XenApp server. Or potentially we could even extend the disk. So that way, if something is consuming the disk that is not related to temp files, we can actually extend that disk. So if there's log files being stored on the C drive somewhere that's not a part of the disk clean manager, we can actually continue to extend that disk up into a certain threshold. So that way, you know, users are not getting broken when they run out of disk space. And we can actually set up an email alert as well that will notify you when that low disk alert happens. For unregistered VDAs, this is one that I've heard a lot about recently. When we brought out the automation, people have been mentioning this, that when their systems come up, they get, you know, VDAs that are in an unregistered state for whatever reason, and they want to fix that. They want to fix that either by restarting the broker agent service or restarting the virtual machines themselves. And so I'll actually just go over how we can do that pretty quick. And then I'll talk about optimizing cluster resources. So this is something new that I've been working on, at least on the hypervisor and on the Hyper-V side. And then potentially we can look at it on the VMware side as well, especially for people who are in the lower tier of the VMware licensing where they don't have things like DRS. We can actually optimize cluster resources through scripting as well. And then I'll get into enabling the local host cache faster than what Citrix is capable. So let's start with low disk space. Excuse me. So I'm going to get into my machine here. So I've got a VDI machine, and we can see if I drill into him, and let's look at his logical disks. He's at 5.5 gigs of free space with a capacity of 59.5. I actually have a trigger set up to monitor this guy to make sure he doesn't run out of disk space. And what I've got is I'm targeting the logical disk, and I'm looking for free space is less than or equal to 5 gigabytes. And my scope is this free space folder, so it's just this one object. And I'm going to run this action. So I'm going to connect into vSphere. I'm going to extend the disk by 1 gig. And then I'm going to tell Windows to accept and resize that partition to consume that additional 1 gig free space. So that way it's not just extending the disk and then doing nothing. We're actually making it usable for the Windows operating system underneath it. Okay, so I've actually got my machine open over on another window here, and I'm just going to run a PowerShell script to consume that disk. And we'll see our free space here drop down to about 4.5 gigs. Okay, and then ControlUp, it takes about 3 seconds for ControlUp to notice that, and then it'll pick it up, and ControlUp will then automatically run our action to increase our capacity. So we'll see our capacity increase, and then we'll see our free space increase. So the capacity increases that logical disk size going from 59.5 to 60.5. I've got it increasing at 1 gigabyte intervals. And then we'll see the free space go up, and boom, just like that. Look how quick that was. It's amazing. So free space shouldn't be an issue. And if we go into our triggers, and if we were to tie an email alert into it, you would be notified, hey, we had to increase this free disk space. So if you've got, PVS servers with that write cache, and you're kind of, playing a little bit loosey-goosey with how much free space you have on there, we can actually make sure that you don't run into an issue by having it run out. And then obviously here we can actually specify, hey, let's send an email alert to Yoni that this free disk space action had to occur. So this way your administrators can actually go and take a look and actually see what's going on. Do they actually need to increase it even more, or so on and so forth. All right. The next one was unregistered VDAs. So talking to a lot of you, talking to a lot of customers, and talking to a lot of people when I'm going to the CUGC events and so on and so forth, unregistered VDAs is just such a pain. A lot of people have their reboot schedules happening at 5 in the morning, and sorry, I'm just going to pause for a second to see. It looks like I've got a lot of questions. I'm just going to try to run through some of them. Can a pop-up message be shown in the user session to indicate if a trigger is made, i.e. an app is run at appropriate times? So yes, we can actually pop up a message pretty simply. Excuse me. There is a command by Microsoft that's built into all Windows operating systems called MSG, and you can actually send a message to a user. So we can actually tie this in with a script action, and this will actually pop up a message with whatever text you want to have if you want to tie that into a trigger to send to a user. Does ControlUp support Citrix Cloud? ControlUp supports monitoring Citrix Cloud in the sense that we monitor the virtual machines themselves, so your Zen app or your Zen desktop servers. ControlUp needs to be on the same network, but it can support those resources. ControlUp doesn't monitor the control plane yet. That's something that we're working on. I don't know if there's a timeline for that available. Next question. So are these scripts available somewhere? The Citrix session recording scripts will become available when the blog post goes out. Otherwise, almost all of our scripts are available in our ControlUp script library, which are thankfully someone posted into the chat as well, so you can check that out. And does ControlUp support Citrix Cloud? This is coming soon in version 8. All right, so there you go. It's coming soon in version 8 at some point. Okay, so back to the unregistered VDAs. I know that this is actually what everyone is really excited about. So let me go back to my lab here. I'm going to go to my computer. So what I'm going to show is I've got these different Citrix VDAs that I've got. And what I want is I want to create a trigger that looks at whether the machines are powered on, whether they're registered or unregistered, whether their maintenance mode is on or off. So what I want is powered on, unregistered, or not available. And so what I've got is I've set up 3 triggers for my unregistered states. So looking at the first one, because what I've determined is that there's 3 real settings that you want to try to do to alleviate these problems, and each one comes with a bigger hammer. So if we start at the 10-minute one, after a machine has been turned on for 10 minutes, these are the properties we want to filter on. So the computer is not available, it is not registered, the power state is on, maintenance mode is off, and there's no users on it. So if we encounter all of these to be true, then we want to just simply restart the Citrix desktop service. Potentially there was something that had happened that had caused the Citrix desktop service to be broken. And we can take a look at what this script looks at. And that's just a simple restart, sometimes fixes it. Okay, so here's my script. So all I'm doing is I'm getting the broker agent, I'm stopping it, I'm telling it to wait till it's stopped, and then I'm starting it. So essentially net stop, net start. I put it in PowerShell so that way I can actually write some error messages if there was for some reason why it didn't start successfully or stop successfully. And no arguments is necessary. This can just run directly on the machine itself. So we can see it's computer and target machine. So if we look at one of my, I'm actually going to adjust my triggers for the purposes of this demo. So, ControlUp, we love doing live demos, and this is crazy fun stuff. So let's set this up to be 5 seconds. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop the broker service on one of these virtual machines. So I can do that all through within ControlUp. So I'm going to take the Citrix desktop service and we'll just stop it. And we'll see it'll go into a stopping state here. Okay, it stopped. And then if we wait, I think it's like 20 seconds or a minute or so, the machine will both pick up unregistered and unavailable. Okay, and we see we went from unregistered and not available. And so now ControlUp will pick up that, as long as I've got no one on here, and I don't, ControlUp will pick up that these two are both true, and then it'll subsequently kick off its script-based action to resolve this. And boom, we can see it went back to registered and available because ControlUp restarted the service. And how can we actually validate that? I've actually got another script action that will be coming out shortly that allows us to actually see the ControlUp automation, the ControlUp actions in progress, or that had completed, sorry. So as this runs, this will actually create a new window for me, and this will actually go through and give me a list of all the automated actions that occurred, or all the actions that occurred on that server. Okay, and while that's running, we'll go on to the next one. So that was one. So restarting the service. Let's move on to the next one. So I'm going to take this guy and I'm actually just going to disable him so that way he doesn't restart the service again. Actually, we can even leave him and we'll do this guy now. So what we're going to do in this one is we've got all the same properties being true. And this time what we want to do is reboot the machine. So very simple, shutdown -R -T. And so this one I'll set for 10 seconds. Okay, so now what we're going to do in order to fail the first one but enable the second one is I'm going to go back into the services and we'll look at the Citrix desktop service, and this time we're going to edit it. So this time we're going to set it to disabled. And now I'll stop it. And so what's going to happen is that that first script is going to run and it doesn't change the startup type. So it just tries to stop and restart the service. And it's going to fail on starting the service. And when it fails on starting the service, then it's going to move on to rebooting the machine. So we'll actually see the machine actually start to reboot itself. And boom, we can see, missed it, but yeah, it's shutting down, it's rebooting. So we've got from one hammer to another hammer to a third hammer now. So sometimes you're not actually able to get into Windows itself. And so this is a bigger problem where the machine freezes on boot. You've got a PVS machine or something like that, and I'm sure everyone has encountered it where the machine is just hung on boot for some reason. Well, we can add the third hammer into it. And what the third hammer, excuse me, what the third hammer is we can actually go through all the same properties, but this time we're adjusting the duration state to be 20 minutes. And this time we can actually run an action against our hypervisors itself. So again, I'm using Hyper-V, so I'm using SCV VMM and doing a hard reset of the virtual machine, but we can do the same thing with VMware and so on and so forth. And so if we look at this, I'm not sure if I looked at the reboot machine script, but if you guys wanted to see it, I'm sure you do. It's you know, ridiculously simple. But now let's look at the SCVMM hard reset. So I've got this guy, and again, you know, ControlUp, it can just simplify these scripts down to almost nothing because all of that conditional logic is put into the trigger. So in this one, I just want to execute this action, get the virtual machine. I'm taking one argument, which is the computer name, and I'm telling it to stop, and then I'm telling it to start. And so within here, I've got my argument, which is just passing the virtual machine name. So incredibly cool. Unfortunately, I actually had a machine that froze on boot, but I don't have one now, so I can't quite demo the hard reset, but I was amazed this morning when it worked on one of my machines that was frozen. So, you know, just, you know, something to think about. This is going to be another blog post coming out eventually, and it'll be more focused towards VMware once we get there, fixing your unregistered machines and making them available again for you. So look for that in the future. All right, and then optimizing cluster resources. So this, again, this will work on multiple different hypervisors. I'm, again, on a Hyper-V cluster, so I'll focus on this, but this will work the same against VMware or Citrix if you use those as well. We can see in my hypervisors, I actually have a gross imbalance between where all my virtual machines are residing. And so I have actually written a script to fix it. And SCVVM optimizes host cluster. I've submitted it to the community, so this should be coming out soon. And we'll just take a look at what this looks like. So this is unique in that I'm assigning it to the host, and my execution context is now other computers. So I'm actually running this PowerShell script on my System Center Virtual Machine Manager. So for VMware, you'd probably have to run it somewhere where you've got the VMware Power Client installed or so on and so forth. And then I'm running it with some credentials, with shared credentials out of our credential store. So this account has the permissions to actually execute the actions within the script. And so my script actions are pretty simple. I take one parameter, I take the host name or the host itself, and then I run these commands. So I get the host cluster, and then I run the start SC dynamic optimization. And then again, the arguments is just the host name. So in order to make this work, we need to adjust this vCPU to physical CPU ratio. So that way it's 2.7 or so, because I don't have that set. So we can actually do this live, or I'm going to attempt to do it live. So let's add our trigger. Let's create an advanced trigger. We're going to work on the host level. We're going to go to this state, and we're going to look for that column, vCPU to physical CPU ratio, and we'll say greater than or equal to 2.7. And I'm going to run it against my Theory PC, which is fine. It'll only count to those guys. Actually, I'm going to change it to my Hyper-V cluster. So you can see it matches up there. And we're going to run our follow-up action. SCVVM optimize this host cluster. And I'm just going to give it a name. Optimize cluster resources. So now what I need to do is I just need to move one machine into here so it exceeds that threshold. So if I look at my failover monitoring cluster, I just need to move one guy. So I'm going to move this guy onto that host. And ControlUp will pick up that his vCPU to physical CPU ratio will have changed. Once it's done moving. Maybe we'll throw a couple more on just to be sure. Oh, there we go. So now he's at 2.75, and we'll see if the optimization kicks in. So doing this all live, creating a trigger live, we'll see. Oh, well, I can actually see within my failover cluster manager, it's automatically started to move resources around. So it looks like the automation is kicking off. So that's awesome. So once that's done, we'll see these ratios start to change. Okay, and actually I have to be very, very quick, so I'm not gonna hang around and watch this go, but we can see it's executing. So the localhost cache, so this is another trigger and script action that I've done, and I've created a blog post for it. So you can actually check that out on controlup.com. But what we've got is I walk you through actually creating triggers to actually monitor your localhost cache. And what we can do is we can actually look to see if the database goes down. And if the database goes down, we can actually enable the localhost cache as soon as we detect that. And the reason for this is we actually had a customer who was having a problem where their database was fluctuating. It was flapping. It was going up and down and up and down and up and down. So Citrix was turning on the localhost cache, turning it off, turning it on, turning it off. And the problem with that is that when ControlUp or when Citrix does those changes, there's a delay between that and when you can start accepting sessions. So each time it flips from on to off, there's like 90 seconds between, you can't have any sessions. So if the database goes down and then 60 seconds later it goes up and then 60 seconds later it goes down, you're now down for like 5 minutes. There's no one connecting in. So what we can do in ControlUp is if we detect that the database has been down, we can just say, turn on the localhost cache. And then if the localhost cache gets turned on, you wait for your resources to re-register, and then you've got sessions again. So you're able to continue to operate. So pretty cool. It allows you to avoid that flapping issue until it is passed, and then you can subsequently restore the database itself. Or you can actually create another trigger and say that you want to flip that localhost cache back to being restored. But say you wanted to say database connected, you want it to be connected for at least 15 minutes or something. And then here you can say, set your action to change it to turn the localhost cache off. So then the database has been on and it's solid for some period of time. Okay, and then I want to get into insights real quick, if that's possible. So if we look at ControlUp Insights, ControlUp Insights is our historical monitoring tool. It allows us to actually, track resources and everything that was done historically over time. So we've just added the new Citrix NetScaler ADC, but some of the cool stuff within here that I want to highlight is like the session resources within a user's session. So what did they do throughout that day? So if we look at like Tony there, if his session details start to load, and sizing recommendations was the next one. So if we look at sizing recommendations too, we can actually see that ControlUp, what it does is it's got intelligence within it, it's got machine learning
to actually determine whether something is oversized or not. And so what it does is it takes a look at everything over the last month, and it looks at your 95th percentile CPU utilization and determines whether or not you have sufficient cores or sufficient memory. So here we can see, you're consistently around 2 gigabytes of memory consumed. So it's suggesting we add another gigabyte because we're consuming up to the upper limit. For CPU, it says we're totally fine in this particular machine, and so on and so forth. So we can take a look at what those are for each one of these guys. So this guy says, remove 1 CPU because he's oversized, remove 1 gig of RAM because over the course of the month, he's not consuming that much resources. So pretty smart, pretty intelligent. It helps to rate size your environment. This helps if you're not doing 50-50 stuff. Otherwise, you'll have to take that into consideration. Okay, so we've got 3 minutes left. Stephanie or Lisa, I'm not sure how much time we need for the wrap up.
We can take a little bit of time if you want to get to some of the questions that have come in.
Sure, sounds good.
Lisa, I know I threw some out there for you guys if you want to cruise through them.
Sure, so I'll start with this one. What about the traffic ControlUp generates by gathering information on the host machines? What throughput is roughly needed? For example, 100 provision machines in your current scripting setup. So the ControlUp agent itself, I think it consumes about 2 to 3 kilobytes per second per resource. So per resource being per machine. So that's about how much bandwidth you need. So if you've got 100 machines, it might be around 200 kilobytes or so of bandwidth needed. And I believe you can actually throttle that to some degree as well. So you can adjust that amount, I think. Can Insights record historical sessions on the NetScaler? So our Insights right now, this is what we're looking at. So, we can look back 24 hours, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. So this is all the data that you can see within there. So you can see the number of user sessions or HDX sessions that have connected in. I don't know if we provide the individual sessions at this point in time, but we certainly provide the counts. So you can actually see how many users have been connecting in through it. Are there any other questions I'm missing? Will the updated new blog post on the hypervisor VM start stop going to be on your blog, CUGC blog, or ControlUp blog? So all of the content I've shown you here will go up on the ControlUp blog. We are working with Citrix to potentially post some of this information on the Citrix site as well, but it'll definitely be on the ControlUp blog as well.
I put a link in the chat to the ControlUp blog.
Thanks. I don't know if I missed any other questions.
Well, since it's time, what I can do is any other questions that come in, we can take them offline and I can send them to you afterwards. And we have a forum thread that's open for this event, so we can post all of that there as well, if that works out.
Sure, I've just got maybe one more to address. So
okay.
in case any unregistered machines are pinging but not accepting sessions, will it still be applicable? So you saw that I actually had 3 stages of actions to do. So if a machine is unregistered and restarting the service doesn't fix it, then it will reboot the machine on stage 2. So in that particular case, it doesn't matter if it's pinging, if there's no users on it and it's unregistered, that reboot hopefully will resolve your issue. So hopefully that answers that question.
All right, thank you. I just have a couple of announcements. If we're ready to wrap up, I have a couple of things for CUGC that I want to make sure we share with everyone. Let me grab the screen. All right, can you see my PowerPoint? There it is. Okay. All right. Just want to throw out there that applications are currently open for the next class of our Women in Tech mentoring program. ControlUp is one of our sponsors, and we thank them for their support throughout the year. It's been a great year. great mentorship program, and lots of opportunities to get together at Citrix Synergy, all kinds of stuff that goes on throughout the year. So it's a great program if you're interested in applying. The applications are now open. And so we have several large events occurring in the next couple of months. So tomorrow is our CUGC XL in Great Lakes. It's at Miller Park in Milwaukee. If you're in the area and you haven't registered, you don't know about it, this is a great free all-day event to go to. I know ControlUp is going to be there. We also have in October, we have Denmark and SoCal. So 2 more XL events coming up before the end of the year. You can find out all the details at mycugc.org and look on our events calendar. And finally, for those of you who opted in to potentially win a pair of Apple AirPods, we will choose a winner at random offline, and we'll notify everyone who the winner is on Twitter. So be sure to follow us on Twitter at mycugc. And make sure you come on to mycugc.org as well. If you haven't been out there, if you're a new member, come and check it out. We have local groups all around the world who meet regularly and do lots of great events. So there's also great forums. If you have Citrix questions or any other kinds of questions, come online and ask those and get involved. And as I mentioned, we have a Women in Tech program, and we have our XL events. We have lots of resources and blogs and all kinds of stuff for you there. So please check us out. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for being on the webinar today. For those of you who didn't get all your questions answered, as I saw a couple more coming in, I'll definitely get those to Trenton and Lisa, and we'll get answers for you. And you will receive a link to a forum thread tomorrow in a follow-up email, and I'll try to have everything posted there if possible. You'll also get a link tomorrow to a recording of today's presentation and to a survey, and hope you'll fill it out and give us your feedback. So with that, thank you, Trenton. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at mycugc.org again soon. Bye, everybody.